we have another segment of Lattes with Leanne, and today I'm so pleased to introduce Mark Buhler. Not to be confused with Ferris, right?
No.
He never gets that. Anyway, and Mark is an esteemed appraiser, and he actually teaches classes throughout the country, right, Mark?
That's correct.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about appraisers, because I know every time somebody buys a house, they're all sweating, right? Is it going to appraise? Am I going to get a good appraisal? Oh, I had a horrible appraiser, right? That sort of thing.
It happens, definitely.
So, and blame it on the appraiser, not the house, right?
Well, it's funny because people would ask me, is the house going to appraise? And I always tell them, every house I've ever been to appraises. It might just not appraise at what you need it to.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Funny. So before we get into the details, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the appraisal process.
Well, when an agent sells a home, the appraiser gets the appraisal order, and the listing agent is the point of contact for the appraisal. So the appraiser calls a listing agent to schedule the appraisal to come and look at the property. They come and they go through the home and they take photos of every bit of the home. They measure the whole thing. And then they go search the area for similar comparables that are recent and go back to their office and prepare the report. In a nutshell, that's how it works.
Right. And you make adjustments, right? When you do it, because whenever I evaluate a property, I'm always doing all sorts of adjustments because no two houses are alike, right?
Not very often. So yes, adjustments are made to make the sales comparable, that recent sale from the neighborhood, equal to the subject property. So if the subject property is superior in any way to the comparable, then the value, an adjustment is made upward to that comparable to make it equal to the subject property, if that makes sense.
It does. So if you're better, you get a positive adjustment. If you're worse, you get a negative adjustment. And those adjustments can be for square footage, for lot size, for views, we were talking about special adjustments that you make and that you teach people about, like solar and like ADUs, and
Yes.
I'm sure there are other things, well, pools, but that's kind of a more standard appraising adjustment. However, the solar is very interesting, and so is the ADU. They're a big thing right now, ADUs, since they're statutory. And the state actually has specific rules, and the cities can't over.
Correct. So the typical adjustments for properties in our area in Orange County, the main drivers of value are typically location, view, overall condition of the property inside and out, and square footage and such. But when we get into these newer amenities such as solar and ADUs that have basically been driven by policy, new construction has to be built what's called zero net energy, meaning the home has to power itself. So anything you see that's new is going to have solar, and a lot of people have added solar to their homes to combat high electric prices. So for an appraiser to determine the contributory value of that solar, it's a hard question to answer. And so we have to look at it from a number of different ways. If we can find sales that have solar panels and extract out the contributory value from an owned system, because if they're not owned, then we're not to give them any value per the Fannie Mae guidelines.
And it could be a negative value if the people don't want them, and they can ruin the roof.
What becomes negative from my experience is the marketability of the subject property, of the property that you're selling. If there's solar on the roof that isn't owned outright, now you not only have to sell the home, but you have to sell a financial obligation for those panels. It could be a lease or a power purchase agreement or buying out the loan.
Right.
And so now you're not just selling real estate, now you become a solar salesperson.
Exactly. and those leases people can sign bad solar leases, really
Yes,
bad.
some have been predatory, and we don't see too much of that anymore, but
in the past,
yes.
for sure. And then what about ADUs? How do you deal with those?
Again, that's a very difficult question or problem to answer in the appraisal process, because the appraisal mantra says that cost doesn't equal value, and ADUs are not inexpensive to build. So a homeowner's expectation is that if I spend $200,000 or $300,000 on an ADU, that the value of my property will increase by that $200,000 or $300,000. But to extract that from the market is difficult to do. So we would utilize, again, if we had another sale that had an ADU and could extract everything else out and see what's left over that would be attributed to that accessory dwelling unit, or we could treat it as if it was an income producing property.
Yep.
And do an income approach to value.
I was going to suggest that. Why don't we pretend we're going to rent it out, and the rent would be $2,000 a month here in this neighborhood, so we could use a cap rate and actually come up with a value that way. So yeah.
Yes, appraisers would use a gross rent multiplier, which is calculated for the area by determining the sales price of a property that's a rental divided by its monthly rental. And that number, let's say it was in this situation, 200 was our gross rent multiplier, and we're getting $2,000 per month for the accessory dwelling unit. You would simply multiply the $2,000 times the 200 and come up with $400,000.
Got it.
However, that probably is not supported by the market. Are we seeing homes with ADUs sell for $400,000 more than those without?
Yeah, you usually when you have an ADU, you lose something. Like sometimes they lose their garages, right? Sometimes they just lose a big portion of their backyard and they squeeze it to the point where there's hardly a backyard. So there's a lot of factors that you might have to go back and say, but our yard's smaller now, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of mitigating factors, and appraisers have three approaches to value that they can utilize. So we have the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach, which I just explained. However, in a federally related transaction, Fannie Mae wants to see any adjustment made to a comparable supported by the market reaction. So if we can calculate the cost, says the ADU is worth $300,000, and the income approach indicates it's worth $400,000, but realtors are only selling them at a $100,000 premium,
they're going to do the 100.
We're going to lean towards the 100 because it's supported by market reaction.
Exactly, and that's what you do when you're brought in to give an estimate, an appraisal on a resale. Is you use market analysis typically. You're not usually going to use a cost, or you're not usually going to use an income producing like a cap rate or any. That's more commercial and apartments. Yeah.
Yes, 2 to 4 units for residential would be, you would implement the income approach. The cost approach is usually included in a single family lending situation, whether it be a purchase transaction or a refinance, but sort of as an afterthought. We're putting most emphasis into the market approach, the CMA and realtor terminology, or the comparable sales.
Right.
That's our number one. If we were to calculate an opinion of value based on sales comparison approach, cost approach, and income approach, and say which one are you most comfortable or reliable, or what would give you the most credible results, most often we would say the sales comparison approach.
Of course, yeah, great. Well, Mark, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for your information, and I'm sure Steve's going to show your information below here so that you can give some calls and for people who need an appraisal. A lot of times people need appraisals, right?
Yes, most often I do appraisals when people inherit properties or they're splitting up a marriage and determining the value of their assets.
Yeah, exactly. Neither one too happy, no.
No, but it's legal and they need to have it done.
They need to have it done. Well, again, thank you so much, Mark. And
thank you for having me, Leanne. I appreciate it.
We appreciate it. Bye.